All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for adapting. We're glad to see the rain. Unfortunately, of course, we had an event planned for today, but the rain is much needed, so we'll take it and appreciate our speakers being able to adapt and switch over to a virtual format for today. So we have three speakers this morning. Jodi Switzer is going to be our first speaker. She is the Water Program Director with the Farm Bureau of Ventura County. She's going to be speaking about the irrigation and nutrient management plans that growers need to be starting to have as of this year. Danny Klittich is the Director of Agronomy for Mission Produce and the current California Avocado Commission Production Research Committee Chairman, and he is going to talk about pests. And then lastly, Ben Faber, Farm Advisor for Ventura County and guru of all things avocado, is going to talk about pruning. So Jodi, if you're ready, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I wish I could have seen everybody's faces in person, but really great to see a lot of familiar faces and names here on the Zoom. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And then I'm also going to throw in some links to the chat. So you should all be seeing a chat now with some links for forms and whatnot, and informational handouts that I'll talk through as I go through my presentation here. So what I'm going to talk about today, as Tim mentioned, are some new requirements in the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, and these are the Irrigation and Nutrient Management Plan requirements. As I'm sure a lot of you who listened to my talks before know, regulatory programs love acronyms. So we call this one the INMP for the plan, or the INMR for the report part of this. I'm going to start off with a really quick kind of regulatory background to give everybody some framework to understand where these requirements came from, why the regulators thought they were needed, and what the intended outcome of these new requirements are. So again, if you've seen my presentations, this should probably be a pretty familiar slide, kind of starting us out to bring us to a high-level view of why we're talking about this in the first place. So this all comes down to the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, which is overseen at the state level by the State Water Resources Control Board. And then each of the 9 regions in California, they develop their own specific regulatory order for that region. And it might be called a conditional ag waiver, like ours used to be, or an ag order, or a WDR, which stands for waste discharge requirements. But all in all, they apply to growers who irrigate a commercial crop, regardless of the region that you're in. They all regulate water that discharges into surface water, and that can be irrigation tailwater, tile line water, or stormwater, as well as what leaches into groundwater. And the overarching goal of that to be to control any contaminants from getting into our waterways, into our groundwater, and protecting the beneficial uses of those water bodies. Another thing that these programs all have in common throughout the state is that there are compliance pathways where regulated landowners and growers can comply on their own as individuals, in which case they work with the regional board directly, do all of their own sampling, all of their own reporting, et cetera, or they can join a third-party coalition that shares resources and does that collectively. And so that is what VCALG does, the Ventura County Agricultural Irrigated Lands Group. And we've been in place since 2006, administered by the Farm Bureau of Ventura County. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I just wanted to emphasize how this program has grown and evolved over time, which leads us to the moment that we're in right now. So this regulatory program first started in 2005. It was under a conditional waiver, or conditional ag waiver. And those were adopted in 5-year terms. So about every 5 years, we saw a new conditional waiver be adopted. And as you can see kind of in this hierarchical structure here, The subsequent waiver would bring along the requirements of the previous waiver, and then it would add new requirements. So as time goes on, these requirements built more and more. 2016 was a really significant time because this was when the third conditional waiver was adopted, and it included quite a few new requirements at that time. An increased focus on groundwater, source investigation studies where we had increasing trends in surface water concentrations, which luckily were only very few areas, watersheds in the sub-watersheds in the lower Cayugas Creek watershed. There were compliance dates for TMDLs, which are total maximum daily load requirements. And then there were nitrogen management plan requirements that only applied in specific watersheds where there were exceedances for nutrients in surface water. So I'm sure many of you probably attended our training class to certify these plans, which we started rolling out in 2018, have done quite a few of those since that time. But under the 2016 waiver, these requirements only applied in those certain watersheds. Then in September of 2023, the Ag Order was adopted, and that carried with it all of these previous requirements, but added two really significant ones onto it. One is the TMDL-driven requirements, and these deadlines are coming due now. So if this isn't familiar to you, we've done workshops on TMDLs. I've got recordings I can share with you. Lots of information, but this would take me quite a long time to talk through. So what I'm going to focus on today is the second requirement, and that is the statewide precedential nitrogen management tracking and reporting requirements. And those precedential requirements came down from the State Water Resources Control Board in 2018 when they issued the East San Joaquin WDR. And in that WDR order, they said these requirements shall be precedential for all irrigated lands regulatory programs in the state within the next 5 years. So all of you 9 regions, your regional boards have 5 years to incorporate these requirements into your conditional waiver or ag order. So for our region, 5 years was 2023, and our regional board incorporated these requirements into the ag order that was adopted at that time. These requirements focus on addressing nitrogen and surface and groundwater through comprehensive irrigation and nutrient management program requirements. And this includes groundwater quality trend monitoring, irrigation and nutrient management plan development on farm by the grower, irrigation and nutrient management plan report submittal, again, a grower specific requirement, on-farm drinking well sampling. So if you have an on-farm well that is providing a drinking water source, you should have received a letter from the regional board last fall with a directive to begin sampling your well for nitrates on an annual basis. And then lastly, the development of groundwater protective formulas, values, and targets. And this is a little bit down the road. It's a requirement that is directed to the coalitions. So VCAL will have to develop these groundwater protective formulas, values, and targets based on the data that we gather from the irrigation nutrient management reports that are submitted by growers, as well as the groundwater quality trend monitoring that we're doing throughout the county. So I wanted to talk about the why. So what is driving these requirements? Why did the state board promulgate these at the state level? And then focusing specific on Ventura County and looking at where we might have some water quality challenges. So looking first at groundwater, this is a map from our most recent groundwater quality trends report from 2023. So we're looking at a 3-year period here between 2019 and 2022. And the trends in these wells. Each icon here in the map is a well that we are monitoring year after year. And by monitoring, I mean we are working with other agencies who are already out there collecting this data. So United Water Conservation District, the County of Ventura Watershed Protection District, the state drinking well information system. We're working with other agencies who are already out there. We're gathering their data and we're evaluating that data and combining it into one countywide report. And as you can see here, if it's a blue icon, this means The concentration of nitrate in that well is anywhere from non-detect to 2 milligrams per liter, nitrate as nitrogen, which is great. So the threshold we're looking at here is 10 milligrams per liter. Nitrate as nitrogen is the drinking water standard, and the threshold that's significant here. Anything in green is 2 to 5. Anything in yellow is 5 to 10. So all three of these color categories are still below the drinking water standard, which is great. Anything in orange is 10 to 25 milligrams per liter. And as you can see, we only have a few of those in the county. And we don't have anything that's over 25 milligrams per liter nitrates nitrogen. So our snapshot of groundwater looks pretty good. What the regional board would say to that is that they want to ensure that it continues looking good like this, and that protective measures are necessary to continue protecting this drinking water source. Surface water is a little bit more of a challenge in Ventura County. So while our groundwater looks really good, which in many parts of the state it doesn't, but Ventura County, we have pretty good quality groundwater. Our surface water, we continue to have some challenges, specifically in areas where we have tile drain discharge. We also have TMDLs, which is a total maximum daily load regulation. That's kind of a layering regulation above the standard ag order requirements. And these TMDLs apply in each of the 3 primary watersheds in Ventura County. So this means that the main water bodies in those watersheds have been identified as being impaired for nutrients. So the nutrient levels have exceeded the standards that are determined by the beneficial use of that water body. So in the Ventura River watershed here in blue, we've got the LG-TMDL, which had a compliance date of 2019. And that is set at 10 milligrams per liter for the lower reaches of the watershed, or 5 for the upper reaches of the watershed. We've got the Santa Clara River nitrogen compounds TMDL, which is set as a water quality benchmark of 10 milligrams per liter, nitrate as nitrogen. And then the Cayugas Creek nitrogen TMDL, which is set at 9 milligrams per liter. We have, I believe, where we have orange icons, or blue is where we have exceedances for dry or wet weather. So like I said, we have where we have tile drain discharge in the Oxnard Plain and the Somas area up here, we tend to have nutrient exceedances. The Santa Clara River, so far, our sampling over the last couple of years has been meeting those benchmarks. So that's a good story to share. And then as well as the Ventura River watershed, we've only had 1 dry weather exceedance for phosphorus up in the higher reach of that watershed, but for the most part, also looking pretty good. So that brings us to the INMP requirements, and those precedential requirements and the templates that are required within them. So I wanted to talk first about the irrigation and nutrient management plan. This is the plan that is due on March 1st of this year. So everybody needs to have this developed. It's an on-farm plan. So it's not reported to VCALG. It's not reported to the regional board. It is something that you develop and you keep on farm. A couple elements of the plan is that one plan needs to be developed per management unit. So this means the same crop, the same age, the same management practices in contiguous land. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about management units because from orchard growers, that's probably one of the most common questions that I've been getting is how to divide up your ranches into management units and how many plans do you need to have. The first page of the plan here, so this is a 4-page template, which we have a PDF version of this, but we also have an Excel, more dynamic editable version. So if you have multiple management units, you probably don't want to fill out, dozens of pages of these forms. So having a more dynamic spreadsheet version of your plan might make more sense for you. Something that you can transfer information to and from more easily, edit more easily, and maintain multiple plans all in one file document. So having that Excel file populated with your plan information would be your plan. That's something that you would need to have if the regional board were to ask to see this plan. So the first page just identifies your management unit, your crop, the harvest year, the APNs that your management unit overlies. I'm going to talk more about that in a second here too. But this is really just kind of noting your management unit and then the parcels. The second page is really kind of the main focus of this INMP. And this is where you have your pre-season column right here in column A, where you are anticipating your crop irrigation and nutrient needs for the coming year if you're a perennial crop grower, or the coming season if you're an annual crop grower. And then you have your column B right here, which is where you kind of true up at the end of the year. So you had your plan, how much nitrogen you thought you needed to apply, or irrigation water you thought you needed to apply. And then you have your true up at the end of the year. How much did you actually apply? Because you can plan as well as you possibly could, but that plan is never going to really perfectly reflect what happened throughout the year with unforeseen circumstances. The second page, actually the third page, I'm sorry, of the INMP is answering questions about management practices. So what type of an irrigation system are you using? What's your source? What type of irrigation efficiency practices are you using? Nutrient management practices, and then whether you are relying on data that you're collecting to inform decision making. The third page then is where you would note how you certified this plan. So all of those numbers that go into column A, which is your plan, those have to be certified. So they have to be developed by somebody who has the credentials to make those recommendations. And there are 3 ways that you can do that. You can self-certify your plan. So this is a grower who has attended the CDFA approved training workshops. That's the training that we put on. It's about a 6-hour training program. And then it's followed by a 30-question multiple choice test that you would then pass. And then you'd be certified to develop your own plans. Or you can work with NRCS, technical service providers, or you can work with CCA. So those are your 3 options. That person would then sign off on this plan. And as I said, those plans would just have to be developed and you would have them on your farm by March 1st of this year. So you're not turning them into anybody. It's just if the regional board were to do a compliance audit and ask for that plan, you would have to produce that. And the plans might look familiar because under the 2016 conditional waiver, which I mentioned, there was the nitrogen management plan, so the NMP, which only applied in certain watersheds, still required to be certified, so growers would have done that training. Now we have the INMP, so it has that additional irrigation component. Some of the biggest differences is it applies to all growers. So it's now no longer watershed specific. It's just every grower who is subject to the ag order must do an INMP. It has those additional management practice questions that I mentioned. There is a very, very tiny exemption for growers who have operations less than 10 acres in total. They don't have to certify their plan. They still have to do the plan. They still have to report on the plan. They just wouldn't have to actually certify it. So that means they wouldn't have to take the training class or pass the test or hire a CCA. And then the biggest difference is that now there is summary information that is reported every year from these plans. So that's the INMR, the Irrigation and Nutrient Management Report. And this carries over certain information fields from the plan will be carried over into the report. So that column B that I showed on the INMP, which is your true up actuals at the end of the year, that is the information that's going to be carried over into your report. You're also going to report your harvest yield. So how many tons of avocados did you harvest per management unit the previous year? And that number is going to be used to calculate your removed nitrogen from the system. So I'll talk about nitrogen removal coefficients in just a second here. This report is submitted to VCALG. So this will be submitted through our Clearwater portal. It's anonymized. So this is something that was heavily litigated in the Central Valley, where, you know, this is proprietary information to growers and their specific operation, and not wanting that information to be to be publicly disclosed and connected to their operation. So that this anonymity factor is really important, something that we were able to ensure that was preserved in our region's order as well. So when VCAL gets the information, we'll do the analyses that we're required to do. We'll anonymize that data, and then we'll report it to the regional board. The data is going to be used to inform the development of those groundwater protective formulas, values, and targets, and then to identify outliers. So I'll talk more about this in just a second here, but essentially an outlier is going to be looking at a range for a specific crop type of the A-R value. So how much nitrogen you applied versus how much nitrogen you removed for your management unit. We'll plot that all in a distribution curve and see, you know, who is applying more nitrogen per unit of harvest yield than growers of their same commodity type. And those folks would just receive some follow-up. So you'd first just be notified that you are an outlier, and that gives you a chance to take a closer look at your irrigation and nutrient management program. But then there would also be some follow-up education that would be required as well. So the INMP worksheet certification. As I mentioned before, that really minor exemption for growers who have less than 10 acres and who haven't been identified as an outlier in previous years, they don't have to certify their plan. I just want to stress that this is, you know, a pretty minor exemption. I've had some questions from folks asking if they should remove some acreage from their ranches to get to 10 acres. And, you know, please don't be tearing out trees just to avoid sitting through one of my workshops. Hopefully it's not that painful. The self-certification, so growers would attend that training, pass the exam, and then there is a continuing education requirement that applies. So 3 hours in 3 years, you would have to have continuing education units that focus on irrigation or nutrient management. So when VCALG advertises workshops, we advertise them as having VCALG CEUs. So everybody knows that you have to have 2 hours of CEUs per year. This would be an additional requirement that actually could be done together. So if a workshop was advertised as VCALG CEUs and INMP self-certification CEUs, then you can, you know, kill 2 birds with 1 stone there. And if you do qualify for the exemption to certify your plan, this is where you would note those on the respective forms. On your INMP, you would check, yes, I don't have to be certified, and the same for the INMR. Deadlines. So as I mentioned, the deadline to develop your INMP is March 1st of 2025. So for perennial crops, orchard growers, you would be developing your INMP for the entire 2025 calendar year. For annual crop growers, which probably won't be relevant for any of you on the meeting today, but these are going to be developed for all crops that will be planted in the current year. And then the deadline to submit your INMR. So that's going to lag 1 year after you develop your plan. So for perennial crop growers, you're going to submit your report for the prior calendar year. So for this March 1st of 2026 deadline, you're going to be submitting your report for everything that happened in 2025. March 1st of 2027, you'll be submitting it for 2026 and so on. For annual crop growers, they're going to be submitting their plan for everything that they harvested the year before, even if that straddled the year. The reporting gets a little bit more complicated for annual crop growers, but like I said, if anybody in the call has questions about that, then I can always dive into that in more detail offline. So this is kind of just a calendar view of what I just mentioned. So March 1st of 2025, where we're at right now, you're going to develop your first INMP for this entire 2025 calendar year. For March 1st of 2026, you're going to develop your INMP for the 2026 calendar year, and then you're going to submit your INMR for the 2025 calendar year. 2027, again, develop a new plan for the 2027 calendar year, submit your report for the prior calendar year. crop name and age. This is something that I've gotten quite a few questions about. So this ties in with that outlier kind of determination process, is having to have a standard crop name so that we are comparing the same crops together, as well as the standard crop age. So the age that's reported will determine the other orchard growers of your same commodity type that you'll be compared to for that outlier determination methodology. So for tree crops, the categorizations that we've determined are 1 to 3 years, 3 to 10 years, and 10 and plus years. So any avocado growers with orchards 1 to 3 years would be compared with that same that same age orchard grower, 3 to 10 years, and 10 years and over. Then the standard crop name is also linked to a nitrogen removal coefficient. So this is just a screenshot, kind of a little snippet of a full list of nitrogen removal coefficients by crop name. So for avocados, we've got 4.4 pounds of nitrogen removed per ton of yield. And the list goes on. You can find this list on our VCALG website, and then this is a QR code that will take you there as well. So the crop age is something that's only required for perennial crops. So orchard growers would need to note this on your INMP. The reason why is, it's going to influence the yield that you're going to get for a set acreage. It's going to drive the nitrogen applied and the nitrogen demand for that that age of an orchard, as well as the nitrogen removed in harvest. And that age should be based on the calendar year that the INMP covers. So management units. A management unit is defined as the same crop, the same age. For orchard growers, this should be fitting within those categories that I mentioned. So 1 to 3 years, same age. 3 to 10 years would be considered the same age. 10 years and over would be considered essentially the same age for determining the boundary of your management units. Same management practices. So you're irrigating the crops the same, and you are applying the same rate of nutrients, and then contiguous land. So this is an example of one parcel that is outlined in yellow here, where we have clearly 3 different crops. So this is one parcel where we would have 3 management units within that one parcel. And a management unit should account for all of the parcels that it encompasses. So as the example that I showed before, a management unit could be a parcel that is split that was split into multiple management units, or it could be multiple parcels that are encompassed by the same management unit. If you have, this 29 acre orchard here, and you've got 22 acres on this parcel, you've got 7 acres on this second parcel that are adjacent to each other, then your management unit encompasses both of those parcels and totals this acreage right here. It's important that your INMPs and then the INMR that you're submitting for that account for all of your enrolled parcels in VCALG. This is how we'll ensure that that a parcel didn't just not have a report submitted for it, that there wasn't anything missing. It's how you account for all of your parcels, how you can check that compliance box for when we have to submit those reports to the regional board. If you have any parcels that are fallowed, that would need to be its own report. So you don't have to develop a plan for anything that's fallowed, but when you submit the report for in 2020, March 1st of 2026, when you submit your report, you would need to account for those parcels as being fallowed. So we would have an option in the Clearwater system where you report that to say fallowed parcel, no fertilizer or irrigation applied. That way you're accounting for it. It's not going to be marked as something that is non-compliant or something that didn't have a report submitted for it. So the INMR submittal. This is going to be done through Clearwater. So while you have the template, that was included in those links that I sent out, that template just notes all of the information that's going to be carried over into your INMR. So that's the stuff that's going to be accounted for in this report. But, nobody needs to be manually processing thousands of pages of paper or filling out thousands of pages of paper. So the Clearwater system is going to meet that need for us. You'll be able to log in, as hopefully all of you have already seen all of your parcels that are enrolled in VCALG. It's where you've already done your farm evaluation survey last fall. So coming this summer, we'll be working with our developers to build an additional module in Clearwater where you'll be able to log in, see all of your parcels, kind of map out your management units, and do all of your reporting there online. We'll have office hours and call support available to help people kind of, especially in this first year when we're all learning these new requirements, learning this new platform as well. And then to kind of note the information to carry over into that report. On the INMP worksheet itself, there's an asterisk next to certain information boxes. And where you see that, you can know that this is something that's going to have to be accounted for in the report. And then when you do that report in Clearwater, you'll be able to submit your report for all of your INMPs pretty easily, all in one place. So kind of coming back to what this overarching goal or the nearest term outcome of this reporting is going to be identifying statistical outliers. So what that process looks like is the first step is you submit your data. So this is the INMR template. Again, this will all be done in Clearwater that we'll be building out this summer so that it'll be available well before next March's required reporting date. And then VCALG is going to perform some analyses, and that analysis is going to be looking at the A value for each management unit. So this is all of your nitrogen sources summed together. Your fertilizer, which could be your fertilizer that you apply, liquid, granular, foliar fertilizer, any organic amendments that you apply to your orchard, as well as the nitrogen content in your irrigation water. Altogether, that's your A value. And then you'll have your R value, and your R value is going to be based on your harvest yield. So how many tons of avocados did you harvest in calendar year 2025? Then we take that 4.4 pounds of nitrogen per ton harvest yield, and we apply that factor to it. And then we get pounds of nitrogen removed. So we'll have our A minus R per acre in your management unit, as well as an A over R as a ratio per management unit. And then we'll compare those metrics across crops of the same commodity type and same age. So we'll have our 1 to 3 year avocados, 3 to 10 year avocados, 10 plus year avocados. Plot them all on a distribution curve. Most fields would lie in the middle. This is kind of your average of how much avocado growers are applying versus harvest yield per acre. And then we'll have to draw a threshold based on that data. So we won't know what that threshold is until we get that data and can analyze it. And then folks who are above that threshold would be considered an outlier. And there's quite a few reasons why you might be considered an outlier. The first might be your nitrogen application is greater than your crop demand, which this is exactly the reason that this entire new regulatory requirement is intended to address. It's intended to help folks identify what your crop demand is and to apply that value. Another reason might be inefficient application of nitrogen or irrigation water. It might also be something totally outside of your control, like you had reduced yields or crop failure. If you have a really significant Santa Ana wind event that's going to blow all of your avocados off your tree, which you had fertilized anticipating that you were going to have a set harvest yield, you couldn't anticipate weather events that are going to reduce that yield, or a pest issue where you're going to have crop failure. Or you might have reporting errors. Any of these reasons, specifically the ones that are, fall into this category, reduced yields, crop failure, something else that should be accounted for that would explain why your reported values might be what they are, would be noted on that INMR. So there's a box for notes on both the plan and in the report. If you have reduced yield for some unforeseen reason, if you have crop failure for some unforeseen reason, you would want to note that down, because that's something that we would be able to flag when we do that outlier analysis. If there's something that had occurred in your year and your planning that was unforeseen. And then there's going to be a notification. So this is a screenshot from the Kern River Watershed Coalition Authority and their data management system. Because we're still building ours, I can't share what ours is going to look like, but it would be somewhat similar to this. You would have your management units. You would have how much was applied, your harvest yield, your A minus R or A over R metrics. And then you would be able to see where you fell in that, that distribution curve compared to growers of your same commodity type. And a couple of reasons why notification of those outliers is important is because it's an early indicator that there may be excess nitrogen applied. So, this is one of those situations of, if you're applying more nitrogen than your crop needs, or you might have inefficient irrigation or nutrient management practices, then this would be an indication that you might need to look more closely at your fertilizer program. If you were identified as an outlier for one of those uncontrollable circumstances, then this wouldn't apply as much. And as I said, it can help growers improve the management practices that they're implementing. And then in addition to that, that identification, that kind of follow-up to notify a grower that they were identified as an outlier, there are a couple other requirements that would apply. So they would need to indicate that they were previously identified as an outlier on subsequent INMRs. They would need to attend focus education meetings focused on nitrogen and irrigation management. If they were exempt from having to certify their plan because they had less than 10 acres of production, then they no longer could claim that exemption. They would have to have a certified plan going forward. And then others as required by the regional board. And the reason why we have this kind of other category is putting together the outlier methodology and follow-up program is something that VCALC has to scope out and submit to the regional board later this year. So this hasn't been developed fully yet. Once VCALC develops what this looks like, which I don't anticipate it including anything more than these top three, that will have to be approved by the regional board. So there could potentially be other requirements as required by the regional board. And then I just wanted to share some resources and what's next really quick. So you can go to our VCALC website. We've got links to everything that I shared in the chat and more. There's a longer list. And then we also have Spanish resources available. So the templates are translated in Spanish. The training program presentation materials translated. The workbook that's given during that training presentation is also available here in Spanish. And then my last slide here. So what's next? This is a new requirement. It's something that is still being developed. There's definitely understanding on the regional board side that this is something that's going to take some learning and some growing as well. So, we are all learning this together. Where clarification or additional guidance is needed, we're continuing to work with the regional board. So I appreciate growers who have, who've come to talk to me with operation or, kind of scenario specific questions, because it helps us know what additional guidance that we need to either develop internally or that we need to work with the regional board to develop. We're awaiting approval of the nitrogen removal coefficient list. So we had submitted this last May and are hoping for approval of that any day now. And And then we have our ongoing INMP self-certification trainings. So we've got one coming up in February 25th and 26th. And for in-person attendees, we'll have Spanish interpretation available. For anybody who joins via Zoom, it'll be English only, but if you need Spanish translation, please register as soon as possible so that you can get space. Space is limited to, I believe, 60 attendees in the room there. So I'll be sending out another VCALG email early next week with links to register, but we had sent out one about a week and a half ago. But happy to forward that to anybody who reaches out as well in the meantime. And then CDFA Fertilizer Research and Education Program is working on an online on-demand training program. So you won't have to wait for VCALG's next scheduled workshop. There will be an online version of that you can take ad hoc as you have time, and then take the test online as well. So we anticipate that coming in the next couple of months. But they are CDFA FREP is driving the work on that front. We're building tools and resources to assist growers. So we're putting together a calculator to help to calculate how many pounds of nitrogen are in some of the most commonly used types of fertilizer, which should help folks with some of these calculations. And then last but not least is developing this Clearwater module where folks will be doing their irrigation and nutrient management reporting. We'll have trainings on how to do that reporting, how to navigate that additional module in Clearwater, and videos as well. So more to come later this year on that front. And with that, I'm not sure if we have time, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Jodi. We do have a couple of questions in the chat. The first two are related. So the first part is San Diego County part of this requirement? And then the second part of that is, does participation in the San Diego Irrigated Lands Group satisfy the requirement?
So great question. So the San Diego County is in its own region. I'm blanking on the number, which region number it is right now off the top of my head, but yeah, so that's in the San Diego region, and they have their own ag order that is in development or recently developed. I was following the timeline for that, but can't quite remember exactly where it's at right now. But so your requirements would likely be quite similar is my guess, because these are requirements that were promulgated by the State Water Resource Control Board. So the state said all of these things need to be included in each region's order. So there should be many similarities from region to region about what's needed, but ultimately that is the decision of each regional board in what's included in their order. So what I'm speaking on is specifically in the Los Angeles region's order. So this covers Los Angeles County and Ventura County.
All right, thank you. Can you remind everyone what TMDL stands for?
Yeah, TMDL, total maximum daily load. It's an additional regulatory layer that applies when there is an impairment in a water body. So if a water quality sampling has shown that there are excess nutrients or legacy pesticides or dissolved metals or bacteria that are in levels too high for it to meet its beneficial use. And that might be drinking water, that might be recreation, it might be habitat for flora and fauna. It's identified as an impaired water body, and the regional board will then develop a total maximum daily load, which essentially says this is how much concentration of this pollutant that this water body can take in and still meet its beneficial use. And those get incorporated into the ag order. And as I said, are additional regulatory layers that apply in certain watersheds.
Okay. I think one of your last comments about the classes being developed by FREP addresses this. The comment is, losing an entire day to become self-certified is a hardship. Several neighbors here in the burned areas have asked if there will be self-certifying classes offered in evenings or accessible as recorded classes. 6 hours seems excessive to learn how to do this. So
yeah, totally agree. And that's why we've been working with FREP to develop that module. They have one right now on their website. It's specific to the Central Valley though. So when they talk about the regulatory order or certain requirements, it's going to reference Central Valley stuff. So I'm working with our contact there to take in our training presentation that's been customized for Ventura County and to put that online. So I don't anticipate that taking too much longer. Our staff member who's working on that is actually going to be leaving the agency pretty soon. And this is one of the final things on her to-do list beforehand. So hopefully we can get that up as soon as possible. And as soon as we do, we'll be sending out information to all of our DCALC enrollees to let them know that it's available now.
Great. Can you talk a bit about organic amendments and how these will be treated? We apply citrus mulch to avocados, including blocks in development with low production. Do we need to be concerned this will work against us in these reports?
I don't see any reason why it should work against anybody. It is something that would have to be accounted for as a nitrogen source. So on the INMR, on the INMP template, there's going to be a line for organic amendments. We talk about this a little bit in the training program and share some calculator tools. I can't remember the exact name of it right now, but there is an online calculator where you can go in, you identify the source or the type of organic amendment, the region you're in, when you applied it, and it'll calculate how much nitrogen is available in that.
Okay. A couple of questions here, all related. It sounds like only nitrogen removal via the fruit load is accounted for in this equation. Why is tree demand not included in the calculation? And follow up to that, why no leaf analysis to verify tree health?
Good question. So tree demand is accounted for in your A side of the equation. We talked through it in the training program that there's a couple ways of estimating your crop demand. So for orchards, tree demand is definitely an element of that. We've got some resource handouts that Fruit Growers Laboratory had put together to show like for a certain age of tree and canopy size of tree, what the nitrogen demand for that tree is, which should be accounted for in your A value. I think one thing that's important to remember is that A minus R, nobody assumes that that's going to be zero. This equation is not intended to balance out. The focus here is just to try to be as efficient as possible and to keep the gap between those numbers as narrow as possible. So it's also, I think, really helpful to remember that you're going to be compared to other growers of your same commodity type. So, you know, everybody's trees need nitrogen to support the trees in addition to the fruit that they're producing. And it's really just looking at, are you applying significantly more nitrogen per harvest yield than growers of your same commodity type?
Okay, next question. We have one water meter, but have planted small blocks as we've been able to afford to. It looks like all these little blocks will be different management areas. Are we going to have to install multiple water meters all over the farm just to fulfill these requirements?
Yeah, great question. I've gotten this question from quite a few growers. The amount of nitrogen that's being applied in your irrigation water is probably pretty minimal, especially looking at what the nitrogen concentrations are in our groundwater. If you're watering from a groundwater well, or you know, if you're getting it from a purveyor, even less. Do your best to estimate the percentage of water that's going to various blocks. So if you've got a meter on your well and you're irrigating multiple blocks, you should probably know approximately what percentage of that water is going to this block, and this block. And an estimation of that is perfectly fine.
Yeah, that you could estimate that pretty easily with knowing your micro sprinkler size and your run times and how many sprinklers you have per block and come up with a number. If we did the online certification for Central Valley, is that okay for self-certifying in Ventura?
Great question. Yes, it is. And so this is where CDFA FREP, they oversee this training program at the state level. So they have developed the curriculum. Myself, farm advisors with UC Cooperative Extension, CCAs from Ventura County have worked with them to make some customizations for Ventura County, but overall, the curriculum is very similar from region to region. And if you're certified in Central Valley, you're certified here.
Okay, the last question. This is kind of a follow-up to it earlier. It seems to me that making the assumption that yield is the way to determine nitrogen usage is incorrect. It does not take into consideration how much nitrogen went into vegetative growth.
Yeah, my response to that would be these requirements were developed based on the recommendations of an expert panel that was convened in, I think 2016 was originally. That expert panel then informed the State Water Resource Control Board on the East San Joaquin order. And that's the recommendation that this group gave at that time. There is some additional discussion as to whether this has been the most effective approach, if there are changes needed, or to kind of look at how well these requirements have been in addressing some of the goals. The State Water Board with the Central Coast Water Board is convening an additional expert panel here soon. So they're going to be looking at these same questions that you've brought up, and we'll have to kind of wait and see what comes out of that expert panel.
All right, last question, then we'll move on. Will VCAILG email us when the nitrogen efficient rates are approved?
Yes. So as you know, as there's any updates to share, we'll let everybody know. I also don't anticipate those nitrogen removal coefficients. I don't anticipate that the regional board would have much question or concern with approving the numbers that we had put forward, because those are based on already established numbers that have been used in other regions similar to ours, or in research that some of our local farm advisors have done on commodities regionally specific. But yes, as soon as those are approved, we'll let folks know.
All right. Thanks very much, Jodi. We appreciate your time this morning.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, next up is going to be Danny Klittich. Danny is going to talk to us about some insects that are commonly mistaken for avocado pests, as well as a little bit of information about the avocado lace bug. Danny?
Good morning, everybody. Let's get this set up to full screen and we'll get going. All right. So excited to talk to everybody about avocado pests. And we've got, we tacked on some slides on the end of this presentation from UC Riverside to update everybody on avocado lace bug. So, excuse me. Just want to do a quick personal intro for those of us who haven't met, and then we'll play Guess That Pest. Obviously, this was built for an in-person event, so the Guess That Pest is going to be a little bit more challenging here individually. So I'm going to pretend like all of you sitting at home are guessing along with me, and I think you should. I'd like you to, if you can, vocalize what pest you think that is. No one is listening. We have everyone muted, and then we'll see where we go with it. So we'll introduce a pest and then pause, you can guess, and then we'll talk about, I will talk about what it is, and then we'll get into avocado lace bug. So Mission's a global producer and distributor of avocados and mangoes. We operate in 19 facilities around the world, 13 plus countries, and 27 countries that we distribute from. Zooming into California, which is where my responsibilities lie, we farm 400 acres of avocados distributed across 5 ranches, 2 in Ventura County and 3 up in San Luis Obispo County. And my role is to help communicate the tactics that we have found successful in pushing yields on our farms out to growers, and help growers strategize about increasing yields, and that way we have more fruit we can buy from you. So that's the selfish goal there. And as part of that, we've developed a lot of support resources. Here's a fun graphic we put together about the crop cycle for avocados in California. All of these can be found on our website. There's a QR code there if you want to grab that real quick with your phone. But we have reference fertility programs, and that poster's there. We have leaf tissue analysis reference tables, a whole bunch of other fun stuff on those links on the right. So I wanted to throw that up there because we're going to talk about pests today, but there's a whole lot out there that if you need some references, there you go. So let's play Guess the Pest. So we'll start out here with a very common thing that many people see in their orchards year over year. With these necrotic spots, you see that they're venally constrained, meaning they're generally starting along the veins of the leaves or originating on the underside of the leaf. And then the leaf tissue is dying, and then it expands out from there. These are Persea mites. They're microscopic, so each one of the little spots is a colony of several Persea mites in there chewing away at the underside of the leaf surface. I'm going to mention, so the goal of this talk is pest identification. Pest remediation or management is something that needs to be done with your PCA. So the goal here is that way when you're in your orchard and you identify a problem, you can make a decision on what product you feel like you need to apply, or you can reach out to your pest control professional contractor that then can help you figure out what the best management tactic is. Different regions have different products that work better or worse. So this we don't have the time to go into what products would be appropriate to control them. Okay, here's another one. Note here the serpentine pattern, I guess, on the leaf there. And this is leaf miner. And this is our first pest that we're going to talk about here today that is not a primary pest of avocados. So there's a lot of insects that are present and other things and pathogens and rodents and mammals and things like that that are present within our orchards that aren't necessarily pests. And so occasionally we'll see these oddities, and I have a great collection of oddities we're going to look at throughout this presentation today. And these are things that are present, but don't cause enough damage that we need to worry about it as avocado growers. They haven't reached, it's called the economic threshold, where it's worth your time or your money to do anything about it, because it's not really causing really that much damage or reduction in value to your orchard. So this is leaf miner. That's a prime example. That this particular leaf miner is not an issue. Here's another example of that. This is a, you can see here, there's some white spotting on the fruit. And then there's this nice big true bug sitting right here. This is lygus bug. It's a huge pest in strawberries and other vegetables. And vegetables, obviously strawberries isn't a vegetable, but it's a huge issue in strawberries. And this avocado orchard is right next to a strawberry field that they'd mowed down. The lygus came out. Sitting here, it was feeding a little bit on the avocados, but it's not going to cause any long-lasting reduction in crop quality. So it's not a pest that's worth doing anything about. Lygus. Here's another one. Note here you have the chewed leaves with generally starting at the margins, but also some interior feeding. And then on the fruit, you see this pit that's been chewed into the fruit. This is omnivorous looper. This is a pest that rises to the level of treatment quite frequently, mostly because it has high potential to defoliate trees as well as cause direct fruit damage. This fruit will not pass grade and will be a cull fruit when it gets into the packing house at the end of the year. These guys are generally, however, an issue when harsher chemistries have been used in the orchard and most of the beneficial population has been reduced. We saw this be a huge problem when we had area-wide medfly treatment. We had a large explosion of omnivorous looper during that period of time. I believe that was the late 90s because it knocked out all the beneficial populations in our orchard that would generally keep this caterpillar under control. Here's omnivorous looper at the end of the season, omnivorous looper damage at the end of the season. You can see that pit there, and that would be culled out as a cull fruit. This is a rare issue, but can become a major issue. Generally, I've seen it more so on gems and young trees is where it's been an issue. This is called black scale and also Argentine ant. Usually more of an issue in lemons and citrus crops. However, they can show up and feed on avocados. This was taken in Carpinteria where we found this infestation. But Argentine ants will actively protect the black scale from parasitoids and farm them like little sheep and move them around and increase their population. So generally the best way to control armored scale like these, like black scale, are by controlling your ant populations, which nowadays is a lot more challenging. But luckily we don't see this as a very common issue. In this orchard, they did treat for black scale and ants a couple times, and then the population did not return. In this one, we see some burrows in the soil, as well as chewing on the trunk, and in some extreme cases, we can see full girdling of the trunk from feeding. This is classic mice or vole damage, low down on the trunk. Is where we're seeing the damage. A lot of times, you'll see these trees just start to wilt and not be able to stand up to the heat, and you go and dig down a little bit around your leaf layer, and you'll see you have a rodent infestation. This is one we're seeing a lot of this year. What we're looking at here, we have a healthy fruit on the left, and on the right, we have a fruit with the seed coat has turned brown, dark brown before we've cut it open. So we cut it open, and you can see this dark brown seed coat. What this is called dead seed, and this is caused by heat stress to the fruit, generally from those nasty heat waves we've had the last several years. And what this does is it kills the seed, and that fruit actually stops developing at that size. So right now we're seeing that a lot of the 84s that are still hanging on the trees, you cut them open, you see this dead seed coat, and at this stage actually this seed has completely turned into like more of a raisin. You can actually shake the fruit and hear the dead seed rattle around inside the fruit. So this is an issue. These fruit will not size, and that's the maximum size you're stuck at. Here's a picture of a trunk on a tree, and you can see the bark has been chewed off at some point, and the tree is trying to regrow. This is higher up in the canopy, not like we saw with mice and voles. And if we look around this tree, we see these larger burrows. These are older burrows that have been vacated, but nonetheless, these are ground squirrels. So ground squirrels will not only chew around in the soil, but they also will run up into the trees and chew on the trunk and the fruit. Here's some fruit sitting in a bin. And you can see here that there's these brown spots on the fruit. If we pull back the cover that the grower has on here, you can see there's no brown spots on these fruit. This is sunburn from the fruit sitting in the sun after harvest. So be sure to take care of your bins once they've been harvested. Don't leave them sitting out in the hot summer sun. It's less of an issue now in the winter when the sun intensity is not as much. But if you're picking into the warmer months of the year, you really need to keep those bins covered because these will downgrade a lot of the fruit on the top of your bin. This one, a whole new class of pests that we haven't talked about yet.
Sun blotch.
Sun blotch. There we go. Yeah. So sun blotch. Sun blotch is a viroid. It's present within the tree. It is transferable through mechanical transfer as well as root grafting. This generally shows up in more stressed trees. So there's not a product really you can apply to reduce sun blotch infestation in the plant or cure them. The current recommendation is tree removal. It can lay dormant in the trees for a very long time. So limiting stress within the orchard can also limit symptoms. So that is sun blotch, and this will also be stuck in a coal bin because that's ugly and nobody wants to buy that. Here is
Rat chew.
Rat chews. Yep, these are rodent damage. Usually we see this, tree squirrels and rats are the main culprits when we start seeing this up in the orchard. We also have on the very top here, I don't have another slide for this, but this is picker damage, where they're hitting it with a picking pole. And these fruit will also be sent into seconds and coals if the skin is gouged. So make sure when you're looking at your bins, if you start seeing that, to tell the pickers to calm down. And be careful. The main culprit of this is when you have very tall trees and they're trying to get the picking pole at the very, very end of its extension on top of a ladder, and they end up dinging a lot of the fruit, and that will cause issues as well at harvest. We see this a lot in Ventura County on avocados, these little white spots. This is, and I always have a hard time with the word, Latania scale, and not really a problem that we do anything about in the field. They're present, however, they come off really easily with the brushes in the packing house, so it's not a big issue for quality of any type. So they're here, but they just kind of do their thing, and they're under natural control in the orchard. Speaking of natural control, this is a fun find in the orchard. So this is an egg, and you can see here it's on a little filament that's holding it up off the surface of the leaf.
Lacewing.
This is a lacewing egg. Very good. So this is a lacewing. The reason that they're up on these little sticks is because lacewings are voracious predators, and they won't crawl back up the little filament, but they will crawl down, and so it prevents the lacewings from eating their own eggs, or their siblings' eggs. So that keeps the lacewing population going right along. So that's a compliment. When you find one of those in your field, that means you have a healthy ecosystem functioning within your field. Here we have a picture of, we have these necrotic spots throughout the leaf. We have some interveinal necrotic spots as well as some marginal necrotic spots. This is herbicide phytotoxicity. Generally, we'll see this in the lower parts of the tree. It's when herbicides are applied during windy conditions, or somebody is getting a little too cavalier with the wand movements, and we'll see these in the lower parts of the trees. You can see here we have this bronzing of the leaf. It kind of is veinally constrained, meaning it's around the veins. This leaf has also been chewed on by something, but we're looking at kind of this darkening of the leaf. These are leaves picked in the fall. And what this is this is avocado thrips damage from in the fall. So this is fall avocado thrips damage. Not usually something we do a lot for, because the cold weather really puts a hamper on the avocado thrips population, but it can rise to a level where we get concerned. Here's some fruit with some damage on it. We have classic sunburn damage in the upper left here, but then we have this russeting on the outside of these avocados. And this is avocado thrips spring fruit damage. So this is damage that was done at the BB stage, at this stage of the fruit, and they're very tiny. Here's the little avocado thrips right there. He is, or she is, chewing away at the surface, at the epidermis of the fruit. And as that cell continues to grow, you end up with these damaged cells that don't replicate well, and you end up with the damage that we see at harvest. So this is a major pest in California. Most growers have to do something for avocado thrips control. Here's another fruit damaging pest. So we can see here, this is where the two fruit were hanging next to each other. And this is also avocado thrips fruit spring damage, but this is a more extreme population. This was taken 2 years ago when we had really crazy avocado thrips populations up in San Luis Obispo County. And they would actually get in between the fruit and were chewing on the fruit surface to the point where we already see the damage even in the spring. Usually we don't see damage on fruit this big, but if your population gets to this level, it can cause problems. And I'll save you the pain on this one. This is also avocado thrips damage in the spring, but this is directly to the leaves. So when they get at really high levels, they'll feed on the red flush, and they'll damage the margins of the leaf, and they'll actually cause the leaf to cup as it's growing, and it won't fully expand and will cause issues. So you see a tree that kind of looks funky, kind of has a look like we'll see the avocado tip roller here in a minute, has that look to it, but it's not that. This is actually avocado thrips, and this definitely needs to be treated because this will cause issues with canopy expansion and covering up new fruit, and is definitely beyond a treatment threshold and needs to be taken care of. How about this one? We have a wilting tree here on a newer development. We combine that with this picture. I'm sure everybody's got this one that they can figure out. This is gopher damage. Avocados are not gophers' favorite food, but they definitely do eat them. So it's something to be concerned about, and they can cause girdling around the trunk as well as complete devastation of the root system. So something that should be managed within an avocado orchard. How about this? This is once again a new class for a new group of pests, I guess. We haven't talked a lot in this presentation yet. This is hairy fleabane. Hairy fleabane is a Roundup resistant weed that we have in most areas of California. So if you're wondering why this weed will not die, it's because it's glyphosate resistant. The good news is that glufosinate will kill it, and there's 2 products registered, Rely 280 as well as Forfeit 280, that will kill this weed and can be used to knock these back. Now, the keen eye here will notice that this is not an avocado orchard. However, I could not find my great avocado picture for this, but this is a snail sitting on top of a sprinkler. So snails are one of those pests that are not generally an issue in avocado orchards. However, there are two distinct cases where they can be. New orchards that are going in after lemons, there can be a high population of snail eggs in the soil, and they can hatch in nice, cool, wet springs like we're having right now, and they can cause issues in avocados, especially on baby trees. They'll eat all of the growth points, similar to what we'd see with deer damage, and cause major issues. So we need to treat for snails at that point. They can also cause issues here with, obviously, that sprinkler is not going to work very well with a snail sitting on top of it. So they can cause issues with infrastructure problems as well. This is a common one that we go look at every year. Generally, we see this in the late spring. This picture is taken at Pine Tree Ranch a couple years ago. So this is bloom actually coming in. We call this winter yellows. And what this is nutrients are being relocated from those yellow leaves into the developing flowers. This is why we test those leaves in the fall to see what their nutrient levels are. If they have sufficient nutrients, that helps build a stronger, more robust flower that has a higher set potential because it had the nutrients it needs. So this isn't really something that can be prevented, but if you're seeing it early on in flower development, that's an indicator that your leaves did not quite have enough nutrition in them, or that we're going into a really crazy bloom. So you'll generally see it developing first on the south sides of the trees, and then it will move to the north sides of the trees because of the heat differential. This is a newer arrival to the California avocado pest pantheon here. This is avocado leaf miner and tip roller. So you'll see this. This is a really odd life history for an insect, but they start out as a leaf miner, which means they eat the mesophyll of the leaf, the inside of the leaf, and they actually live inside the leaf for the first couple instars, and then they pop out. You can see that down here on the bottom. That's what this is a little mine. They pop out. They crawl their little caterpillar selves up to the end of the leaf, because does turn into a moth. And then they roll the tip of the leaf. So some people call them avocado leaf miners. Some people call them avocado tip rollers. It's the same pest that's doing both these types of damage. To date, there's not a lot of people that have done treatments for these because, one, they're hard to kill when they're in this leaf roll stage. And two, they don't seem to cause direct damage to the fruit. The biggest concern is canopy development. And we do end up seeing the tips missing from mature leaves, but it's not a whole lot of damage to most orchards. However, on young orchards, there are some concerns. Here's two classic symptoms. We have wilting terminal branches here in the understory of the orchard. Then we also have just straight up yellowing in the orchard of the whole canopy. And this is classic avocado root rot symptoms. This sometimes can be Lyme issues as well, but when we see this wilting and this flagging and dieback on the tips, that's root rot damage. This is Phytophthora. Luckily, we have lots of tools to help deal with that now, or a couple, I should say, a couple. Also, when we go dig around in an avocado orchard, we should find roots that look like this in the leaf duff. Happy, healthy, robust root system. That's really what we're growing when we're growing avocado trees, is we need a really strong root system to help support that tree and grow fruit. If we start digging around and we see dead roots and black roots and they're brittle and it's hard to find nice, pretty, healthy white ones, that's a good indicator that we have root rot issues or a big irrigation management issue. This one's kind of hard to tell from a photograph, but it's a little more obvious when you walk through the orchard. There's no growth points left on this tree. They've all been chewed off by deer. So deer control can be a real challenge. Putting up fences on new developments can help, or cages around individual trees. Here's a fun one. I've only ever seen this once. This was a fun demonstration, a fun avocado nerd thing. Here's my kitchen floor and my baby's favorite play toy, an empty box from dinner. So this is a fruit developmental issue, and this line actually started out yellow, light green, white. So it's an area that there was no chlorophyll development in the fruit skin. And now it's turning red. Did you know that when your avocados are becoming more ripe, they're actually developing red pigment on top of your green pigment, and that's what makes them look black? So I thought this was a fun a fun demonstration of that. The avocado tasted great for all of you that are worried about it. But yeah, so a definite oddity. I've only ever seen that once, but I thought it was a really cool demonstration of how our avocados turn black when they're ripe. Here's some avocados that turned a little too far black when they got ripe and really didn't have enough avocado in them to make anyone happy. This is classic zinc deficiency. So not a pest issue, but a nutrient deficiency. It's notably when you have golf ball sized fruit that are perfectly circular. You'll see it usually on an avocado tree here and there. You'll see some circular fruit and they'll stay small. But in a real zinc deficient situation, you'll see all the fruit will be the size of golf balls. This is most common in ranches where high phosphorus programs are used, notably organic systems where manure products are used that are high in phosphate. That can tie up the zinc in the soil, and you can end up seeing a lot of these round golf ball sized fruit. So the treatment there is to apply chelated zinc and then reduce your phosphorus applications. And this can also be induced by phosphite application if phosphate's done at too high of a rate. This is an interesting looking leaf here with its little petechial necrosis all over the leaf. It kind of looks like it might be some type of weird virus or fungus issue, but this is actually frost damage. So if you see this on the edges of your orchard or the low points of your orchard, you got a little bit of frost nip on your orchard. The downside of this is the damage can also be present within our growth points and within our flower developing buds, and that can cause issues going into bloom next year. So we want to try to avoid cold weather stress at all costs. This one looks similar where we have these little necrotic spots, but we also have a lot more marginal involvement here where we have marginal necrosis. And marginal necrosis, dead tissue around the leaves. It's more so a toxicity issue. In this case, it was boron toxicity. Chloride toxicity can also look similar to this. This is an obviously looking unhealthy branch or trunk within the orchard. And this is a Phytophthora trunk canker or crown rot on here. If you kind of dig at this and stuff, you would see that the bark is very soft and very rotten. And so this is a different Phytophthora. This can also look very similar to Botchiosphaeria complex infections. So that's something that needs to be checked before treatment because a lot of Phytophthora products don't do anything for Botchiosphaeria. So that's a talk to your PCA there. And here's an issue that we don't see very often in most avocado growing regions. However, if you're on the coast, you might be a little bit more familiar with this. It takes a lot of high humidity conditions to have this. This is anthracnose. It has this interesting, has this interesting pattern that develops as the fungal pathogen kind of spreads across the leaf, and we see issues there. And then our last pest we're going to talk about today is this guy. A lot of the people that are on the call from the south are going to be a little too familiar with this. This is avocado lacebug, a new arrival to the California avocado industry, or a newer arrival to the California avocado industry that we're still learning about. And we've invested as the California Avocado Commission in learning a little bit more about this pest and trying to figure out how much damage does it do, what can we use to control it, and things like that. We've got the first round of research results in kind of defining who and how avocado lacebug reproduces, or how and where avocado lacebug functions within the avocado orchards in California. And so Mark was kind enough to share these slides, and he has sent his apologies I wasn't able to join us today on this call, but I'm going to do my best to talk through these so we can all get a little bit more familiar with avocado lacebug. So here's the overview. It was first described in 1908 when it was collected in Florida. So it's been in the U.S. for a long time. However, it didn't really show up in California until it was first described in 2017 in Fallbrook, Bonsall, Oceanside, south of LA, San Diego County region on the coast there. So the populations have slowly been spreading. It was found in 2019 in Hawaii, and they've done genetic testing to show that came from a California population. And also in 2022, it was found in Orange County and Santa Barbara counties, as well as in parts of Africa. And to date, that seems to be about where it sits. Carpinteria has a nice population that seems to persist, as well as the southern growing regions. Adults and nymphs live on the undersides of leaves and feed on the leaf, and the host plant is fairly restrictive. It's really just avocados, camphor, and red bay, which are all Lauraceae. It is a true bug, so it goes through the metamorphosis where it has 4 instars in the nymphal phase and then an adult phase, and eggs are laid. Adults live for about 3 weeks, 23 days. Females lay about 50 eggs. The life cycle takes 9 to 10 days for an egg to hatch. I feel like I'm missing some text on this slide. Females do this weird behavior called egg dumping, where they will dump the eggs along with fecal material into patches. You'll see these on the sides of leaves. It's thought that this is done to kind of have safety in numbers. So if a parasitoid comes, it can only parasitize 5 eggs. So it's not all your eggs. It might be distributed between a couple different females. But you'll see this disgusting black stuff on the bottom of your leaf, and that's egg and fecal material combined. They feed on the underside of the leaf. This is a picture of a underside of a Hass leaf. Note that there's also persiamite damage on this leaf, so that's making the damage even worse. And what's been observed in extreme infestations, this is on a bacon in San Diego and National City, and a fungal infection has also come in behind the lacebug feeding and started to cause larger necrotic spots within the leaf. So this is thought to be a Collecticum species complex that's causing this damage. They did some growth studies on how temperature affects longevity and fecundity of the pest, and the longest it lived was 66 days at 15 degrees C, and the shortest was 5 days when it got really hot, up at 35 degrees C. So it doesn't like it really hot, which is probably why we haven't seen it in a few areas like out in Riverside, and also why we haven't seen it up in the northern regions where it stays a little cooler, that it doesn't really like that. The egg laying, the fecundity, is the highest at 25 and 30 degrees C, where it really pumped out some eggs, but once again, they didn't live very long either. So that's a interesting trade-off. Fertility percent eggs hatched, the highest was in kind of what you'd expect, the beautiful areas, 20, 25, 30, 32 got a little hot, and then no eggs hatched when the temperature went above 35 degrees C, which is pretty hot. That's over 100. The phenology of the pest, you can see here that in the summer, in the winter is when we saw that they saw the highest populations, and then when it got hot, we saw a large drop off. However, the feeding stage density was highest at the adult stages, was highest in the summer months. So cooler humid conditions in oceanside correlated with higher HLB populations when compared to hotter areas like Bonsall. Okay. The susceptibility of avocado cultivars to avocado lacebug. There was a decent amount of variability observed between different types of different varieties. So you can see here, Gem had almost no damage from lacebug. However, Zutano did have a decent amount. Reed had a little bit, and Hass is a known host. Fuerte, however, did not ever really show any avocado lacebug damage. They also surveyed for natural enemies in the wild in California and found quite the selection of different natural enemies feeding on the avocado lacebugs, whether it was on adults, or you can see a lacewing chowing down on an adult, or also spiders chowing down, and the kind of the generalist predators showing up. However, most of the populations peaked fairly late and were not very useful for controlling populations. And however, this predatory thrips, frankly, Nully thrips did seem to have some overlap and may be something that rises to the occasion to control them in the future. What's going on? Yeah, so I kind of already talked about this. sorry, I kind of covered that slide earlier, but we have seen that advance north out of the southern regions into the more northern regions. And our take-home message: there's two avocado lacebug invasions into California. One in 2004 from Mexico, and then the 2017 came from Florida. Excuse me. Temperature development doesn't like it below 9 degrees C, below 48. It likes it around 88 degrees, around 31. And then when it doesn't like it when we get over 100, the percent of leaf infestation was highest in fall and winter, and population densities were highest in June and October. Natural enemies were present. Maybe some predatory thrips can do some damage. And then there's concern that when we have the leaf damage combined with racemite and salt burn, these all contribute to reduced photosynthetic activity, and that equals less yield. And then cultivar preference, we have Mexican haplotypes thrived on bacon, and the Florida haplotypes seem to more so like Hass was a good host, Reed and Zutanas were good, Gem didn't like, and Fuertes were resistant to that. So with that, I guess we'll go to questions. Here's my cell phone number. If anybody has any follow-up that they'd rather not ask here and would rather talk to me directly, you're more than welcome to give me a call, and we'll have a discussion about this or any other topic you want to talk about. So thanks, everybody, for sticking around for this. And yeah, we'll take questions now. Tim, got any questions?
All right. Yeah, thanks, Danny. So we've got this first one. There's actually a picture in the chat that you might want to look at. I recently saw an environmentally friendly pest control machine at the World Ag Expo. It's a solar-powered machine that kills insects by attracting them through light and color at nighttime, similar to a lantern. Do you think this might be effective for targeting avocado leaf roller and omnivorous looper?
Maybe. I don't know how active they are at night. They are possibly active at night. There really hasn't been a lot of research, I think, done on what the adult life cycle looks like, or their attractiveness to lights or not lights. So most of the pests that we see otherwise are not really that mobile, so I doubt that'd be helpful there, which I think isn't. Yeah, so I'd have low expectations of that, and plus those two pests aren't generally major concerns.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. This one, do bees transmit sun blotch? No, not directly themselves. So sun blotch can be carried in the pollen and can be moved from tree to tree in the pollen. But so the bee itself is moving the pollen, but not specifically carrying the sun blotch viroid. It's just being moved because of the pollen. This is more of a comment. ALB lived through seemingly unaffected 218-degree days at my location in Southwest Riverside County. Miserable pest. And lastly, yeah.
I mean, I will say, so I think that's a good observation. When it's 118, it's not 118 everywhere within the orchard, right? So when these studies were done, they were done in incubators where it was 118. You know, if our whole orchard got to 118, we'd have bigger issues than avocado lace bugs. So, which we've seen.
Very, very true. The temperature inside your canopy, in the shade, underside of a leaf, where you've still got, some humidity and stuff, can be quite different than out in the open. All right. And lastly, what are the best control options for voles?
Yeah, voles are a challenge. Bait stations can be effective. They are foraging mammals, so they will visit bait stations. Owl boxes are a more ecologically friendly option. Increasing your predatory population in your orchard can be helpful. Reducing organic material around the trunks can also help, especially on young orchards. Like if you have mulch, pulling that mulch back away from the trunks, they don't like that. Also, skirting can be helpful to keep the skirts up off the ground, so the voles have less places to hide. The challenge with that, however, is we like to keep the skirts down to keep the mulch in place. So that's a catch-22 for that one. The biggest issue is also controlling weeds in the orchard. If you have a really heavy weed population with a big canopy built out, the small mammals love that and they'll hide, and that really reduces the effectiveness of the the raptors, so they can't come in and nip away at your small mammal population. It's really impressive if you've ever gone and cleaned out owl boxes, how many dead creatures bones are inside an owl box. And I'm sure many of you have seen perching spots in your orchard where the owls like to come sit on the wind machines or something like that, and the amount of dead rodent bones underneath those is really quite pleasing. So I think that's a nice option. But voles do occasionally get to a level where they can cause massive losses, especially on young orchards with poor weed control. So baiting does come into play at some points. But talk to your PCA on what's allowable in your region and what permits are needed, because some of the regulations are onerous.
All right. Thanks, Danny. Appreciate it very much.
My pleasure.
Dr. Faber, are you still with us?
You bet I'm here. You can't get rid of me.
All right. You want to talk to us about pruning? Should we be out pruning today?
Yeah, let's talk pruning today. That's not what I want. Yeah, we call pruning canopy management. And a lot of times they just get out of hand, and you got to get control over it. So, actually, there's quite a bit of good canopy management going on right now. Boy, back when I was hired in 1989, there was an orchard. The original commercial Hass orchard was planted in Carpinteria, and there were these trees that were 60 feet tall on a spacing of 80 feet by 80 feet. They'd been planted at 154 trees per acre at a, I don't know, 18 by 20 spacing. And then they gradually, George Goodall was the county director back then. He worked on avocados, and he said, you got to thin, you got to remove every other tree. And then they moved every other tree, and then they removed every other tree. And eventually they had 17 trees per acre. And it was a really productive orchard until we had the freeze of 1990 or 91. And then the trees got stressed, and then they got root rot, and then they died. And avocados can live forever just about, unless they get root rot. So anyway, we have this whole thing about canopy management, and ideally you want to see light all the way around a tree. That's the maximum way to accumulate light to turn into photosynthesis. Unfortunately, a lot of our orchards are way too tall. They're growing on mountains, and they're hard to pick when they get big, and it's gotten to the point where you can't use 20-foot ladders to pick these darn things. So we've got to do something. And Ruben Hofsche made some comments about why we should go to high density plantings. And one of the consequences of high density, more trees per acre, is you got to keep them small. Young trees are more vigorous. They produce larger fruits earlier on. They're easier to harvest and to spray. If we're getting more and more pests coming into our orchards, the consequences is spraying of some sort. And the younger trees tend to have less tendency towards alternate bearing. And so this concept of high density was carried on by Andre Ernst down in South Africa. And, they really have gone to the point where high density has gone to like a trellised orchards that look like vineyards now. So it's makes it a whole lot easier to manage these things. So when we're talking about pruning, we're talking about maintaining the productivity of an existing orchard. So once an orchard gets out of hand, you've got to go into what's called renovation. And that's when you look up into the tree and you don't see a leaf within 6 to 8 feet of the ground. And, you know, this is very common. You know, you look into an orchard and you just see a barren space. You know, we've talked about avocado jungles, you know, these places of no sunlight where not even pickers dare to go. So if you're seeing an orchard that is, you know, doesn't have leaves within about 6 to 8 feet of the ground, you've got to renovate it. You got to whack it back and start all over again and reshape that orchard. And if you've been doing some thinning, that means you might want to interplant again to increase the density that's out there. And of course, when you know, cut a tree back, and ideally you want to cut it back to the highest point that is safe. You know, stumping at 3 feet just makes for an unmanageable situation. So ideally you want to be heading back, staghorning it at 6 to 8 feet. So when you do that, the tree comes into production much earlier than if you stump. And it's much easier to guide the growth that occurs, you know, selecting branches that are going to be the eventual new tree. So pruning, there's been a lot of talk about it. We did a major pruning study at Limoneira back in 1990 when we had some trees that were about 40 feet tall. And we headed some back down to 3 feet, some down to 6 feet, and some back to 10 feet. And the trees that were headed, stumped, staghorn back to 10 feet were into production within 18 months, whereas the stump trees took them about 5 years to get into production again. So we're learning how to prune. And there was a University of California publication that came out of 1960, said, prune avocados judiciously. And that's because avocados have got a lot of latent buds. These are buds that are buried beneath the bark that are just waiting there. They're under hormonal control, controlled by the terminal buds, and they don't break until the terminal is removed, and then suddenly, boom, you've got branches all over the place, new growth. It's furry growth that is really difficult to control. Whenever you start making major cuts that are heading cuts that remove terminals, you're going to have to deal with these latent buds, and you're going to have to re-guide that growth, remove a lot of it, probably 80 to 90% of it, and retain the branches that you want for the eventual tree. Another problem that we were facing back in the 90s was people doing the pruning didn't know what they were doing. And, you know, you'd go out there with these grand ideas about how to do it, and you know, you talk to the workers and they go, yeah. And then you'd leave and you'd come back 2 hours later and they'd butchered the trees. So you've really got to keep an eye on how pruning is done to make sure that it's done according to the way you want it done. So there are a lot of ideas about how to do pruning. And so we set out, Gary Bender and I. Gary Bender is the advisor down in San Diego, and he's still advising down there. So we set up a pruning trial back in 1998, and we looked at 8 different styles of canopy management. And we were basically starting with some trees that should have been pruned a lot earlier. We'd gotten these orchards to work on, and we had trouble finding orchards, but we were actually looking at, you know, what could be done to bring a tree down to a level that could be better managed, and we learned a lot in the process. So we set out with 3 orchards in Ventura County and 3 in San Diego, and we promptly had a frost that destroyed 2 of the orchards in Ventura, and one of the growers decided not to participate. So that left us with 2 groves in San Diego that eventually got, one got root rot terribly. And so we were left with 1 grove, basically in San Diego to work with. But we collected data from that 1 grove, and it was an orchard that actually was pretty overgrown. It really should have been renovated. But we carried on with what we had. So the trial went on for effectively 3 years of tree harvest, of fruit harvest. Over the whole orchard, we actually had 6 years of individual tree harvest, though. These are the styles of pruning that we did. We had a non-prune control where we just let the tree continue on during the period that we were studying, the 6 years we studied. We did what was called the Cal Poly low stump, and I'm not picking on Cal Poly, but that's just what we called it. And basically it was a 3-foot stump. And then we did a pruning that left a single leader, and then we stumped with no follow-up. Basically, we stumped at 1 meter or 3 feet and then let it grow. We did every other tree removal. We did what's called the Australian 2-cut method, which is 1 up, 1 out. We took out the tallest branch and then one that was a subtending branch. The Cal Poly high stump, which was basically, we did a staghorning at 8 feet. And then this Israeli method that came up because we had these 2 Israeli consultants that showed up and he said, oh, no, you have to do it this way. And basically it was cutting back a branch to about 2 feet all the way around the tree structure every year for that 6-year period. So here they are. This was the Cal Poly's 3-foot stump, and basically, boy, that is the easiest way to do it. You just cut it and drop it, and chop it in the field, and you can haul the stuff off, or you can grind it and blow the chips back up in the orchard. You always want to paint to protect from sunburn any exposed wood that has been previously in the shade. When you have frost damage or fire damage, and you lose the canopy, when you prune, you got to get in there and whitewash to protect bark from sunburn. Otherwise, you'll basically kill the bark, the cambium below the bark, rather. Okay, this was the stumping at a high staghorning. We cut it into kind of a vase shape. We cut out the center, cut out the biggest branch. Craig Partita loves this style of pruning. We just did light pruning on the outsides. So basically it was bringing the tree down to about 12 to 13 feet and removing the center branch. We did this heading back all the side branches, leaving the center branch and then heading that back to 12 feet, 13 feet. And then we nipped all the sides. This really is problematic in the first several years because avocados fruit terminally. So in the process of doing this, we were removing all the potential fruiting wood. The Australian 2-cut. This was actually a method that is used not necessarily widespread in Australia, but it was used in Australia. Several growers were doing it. And so 2 cuts are made each year, and you slowly bring the tree down. So if you got a big tree, 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet, you gradually bring it down over a several year period. And you start with the center tallest branch and a subtending branch. So this is the Australian 2-cut where you remove this center branch, heading it, and then you head back a subtending branch. Yeah, the Israeli is you kind of break the tree into 5 main branches, and then you on a yearly basis you head back, boom, you leave about 2 feet, and then you come next year, boom, you remove back to 2 feet, and then boom. So you're looking at 5 branches and about a 5-year period of rotation, gradually moving the branches. Now, the problem here is that these latent buds that are down here need light for them to be triggered. So you make the cut and you'll see some of the latent buds pushing, but you really want to have a lot of light coming in. And if you're removing these lower branches, you're not going to be bringing a lot of light in. So you really want to start, if you're going to do something like this, you want to start with the center branch and then move out and then leave the lower branches for the last cuts, because that brings the most light in. And if you don't bring light in, those branches that do break and push, they are going to go straight up because they're looking for light, and they're not going to flower at all until they see some light. So if you're going to do something like this, and I've seen this done here in California, you know, these heading cuts leaving about 2 feet of branch that will allow for buds to push and branches to push. And this is the traditional thinning where you remove every other tree. And that works. Work was done back in the 50s and 60s on thinning. The example of the Hass planting in Carpinteria was successful, going from 154 trees to 17 in a period of about 25 years. So thinning is just removal of every other tree. So here are the results. And so here is the unpruned control, boom. So over that 6-year period, we had the greatest amount of fruit coming off this. And then these are the other treatments. And really you want to look at the later years, what impact they had. So this kind of orange color right here represents what was happening 5 years after the pruning. And the thinned orchard, so the control where we did nothing, and the thinned orchard where we removed every other tree, did the best. And again, this orchard was overgrown. It should have been renovated. It should have been started all over again if we were going to do it right. This Israeli method where you head back branches all around the tree and leaving a 2-foot stub was fairly successful. The 2-cut method, where you remove 1 branch up and 1 branch out, maintained productivity to a certain extent. But all the others, you know, stumping to any great amount, this Cal Poly high stump didn't do very well. So whenever you prune, you are going to reduce something. And the thing is, if you don't do something, you're going to reduce yield in the future. So, and if you don't do pruning, you're going to encourage alternate bearing. So, so lack of pruning is going to impact yield in the long term. So with the stump trees, there's a Pete Stassen out of South Africa developed this, but it's an old axiom of, you know, rule of thumb. You prune to 80%, the height of the tree to 80% of the spacing between the trees. So if you have a tree, a spacing of 20 feet, You don't want to allow the trees to get any bigger than 16 feet. So that's 80% of the spacing. And the reason for that is you want to be able to bring light into all parts of the tree down to the bottom of the tree. As trees grow into each other, the leaf and the flowering and the bearing surface moves up. So, you know, in a tree that's been in an orchard that's been canopied, where all the trees have come together, all the production is going to be at the very, very top, which is the hardest stuff to pick. And it reduces yield at the same time. We found that in doing the 2-cut method, 1 up, 1 out, took about 10 minutes to make the cuts and chop the stuff up. And you can do that twice a year if needed. Pruning ideally is done after the summer flush, after you've done your harvest. Stumping with no follow-up. If you stump at 3 feet or 5 feet or 6 feet and you don't follow up in the sense of redirecting the new growth that comes and removing a lot of the wild growth that comes, is just going to lead to recrowding, and you're going to have to start pruning again. So pruning is something that once you start, you want to do on a yearly basis. You don't want to prune sick trees. If you've got a tree that has root rot, you don't want to prune it. You want to get it into good health and then prune it. So you want to start on a Arondis or phosphorus acid, or figure out why it's not doing well, or get rid of that tree and plant a tree that will do well. And then there really is a major difference of renovation versus maintenance pruning. If you've got trees where you can't see leaves within 6 feet of the ground, you've got to bring them all down and start all over again. Light's needed on all sides of the tree to cause flowering lower down. When you get water sprouts, these are the branches that come out of these latent buds that shoot straight up. If you want those to flower, you have to head those back. That'll force lateral branching, and it's the lateral branches that flower. So upright shoots do not flower. It's the side branches that flower, and it's the terminals on those side branches that do the flowering. When you're pruning, you want to make cuts that are at least 3 to 4 feet lower than the ultimate height of the tree that you want, because you are going to get regrowth that you are going to redirect. When you're making cuts, ideally you want to cut on the south side of the tree first, because that's going to bring the most light in. And when you are doing the 2-cut method, you can go in and make those cuts, harvest the fruit off those branches, and then you can actually leave the rest of the canopy to produce fruit, or to size fruit rather. The higher the cut, the sooner the production. Don't prune alternate trees. One of the things we've seen is people want to prune every other tree as if they were thinning. So what happens is you leave the unpruned tree and it shades the prune tree, and then the prune tree branches just shoot straight up. So you want to prune it as a block, as an irrigation block. Once you start removing leaves, you start removing surface that is going to transpire, and that is causes reduced demand, irrigation demand. In this trial, we didn't pay attention to on-cycle, off-cycle trees. Ideally, you want to prune in an on year, you want to do a little heavier pruning than an off year. So in the modern avocado grove, we see kind of higher densities than historically in the past. They're maintained with pruning. you've got pollinizers in there, you've got lots of bees. You're using gibberellic acid as a bloom spray, you're mulching. You definitely want to get a handle on the irrigation. Ultimately, we don't have an absolute answer about the best way to prune. I like the two-cut method. It's easy to explain, and it maintains trees at a given height and productivity. So this is a high density trial that Gary Bender set up down south. And you can see what happens in high density. When you're doing pruning, you can get some pretty decent yields. This is another trial that he had down in Escondido. You don't completely eliminate alternate bearing, but you still maintain some pretty darn good yields. There's been some work done in Chile. They have the use of plant growth regulators to retard growth. They'll spray and control regrowth. They're doing a lot of pruning down there. How tall should a tree be? It's 80% of the spacing. So, you know, if you've got some people are planting gems at 6 feet by 6 feet. So that means you're going to have a tree that's going to be about 5 feet tall. So you can work it. And this is what happens when you prune and you don't follow up, you just have a jungle. So thank you. And with that, I'd like Tim to jump in here because we did some pruning trials at Pine Tree where we did some of these different methods and we took out more. Do you have any comments, Tim, about the success out there?
Well, not on the pine tree trials specifically, but I would say I agree with you. I mean, pruning is a maintenance thing, and I completely agree 100%. Once you lose the interior canopy of the tree and you don't have any leaves below about 6 feet, the only thing you can really do is to just bring that tree down and renovate it. You know, I've been working with a grower for the last few years, and he didn't want to do that initially. And so we removed one limb per tree. And the problem was the new growth that came out was too shaded and it just, you know, grew straight up. And so finally, after I think it was 2 or 3 years of trying to do that, he finally understood what I was trying to tell him. And last year just went through and, you know, brought the whole block down. And it looks fantastic now. I was there earlier this week and it's regrown beautifully, and we're working on thinning out the regrowth and selecting branches to restructure that tree. You know, and I think that's a lot of growers fall down when they do the renovation and then they don't do any follow-up work, and they end up in 5 years right back where they were. You know, and I mean, I guess that's one way to manage your trees, is to renovate them, let them regrow, harvest them for a few years, and renovate them again. I would argue that you're probably not getting the most efficient yield out of that tree if you're doing that. It's much better to manage that tree effectively every year by making some smaller cuts and keeping light in the canopy.
Yeah, I was impressed when we went to Israel and the avocado World Avocado Congress was there in 93 or 4 or whatever it was. We would go out with these growers and they have, you know, clippers in there, and they were just clip, 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 clip. We were walking around the orchard, clip, clip, clip. You know, it's just whenever they go through looking for their pests and diseases and rats and voles and whatever, they're clip, 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 clip. You know, it's just, you know, became second nature to them.
Yeah. So we're nearing the end of our time, and we have a couple of questions. So let's jump on these real quick. So the first one is, how many hours a day on average does a branch need of a significant amount of light to produce fruit?
Good question. I wish Mary Lou Arpaio were here. She did some studies with photosynthetic activity light, PAR, and you're going to need at least 6 to 8 hours a day. You know, and that's the whole idea, is this tree is an accumulator of light. And if it doesn't get light, it goes towards light. And, you know, that's, you know, the shading effect. You know, a tree that is 8 to 10 years old, you'll start seeing the dieback that happens in the interior. It's just not getting enough light. And so the bearing surface of all fruit trees is about 3 feet from the edge. So you move in, and there's terminals that will flower and fruit. And once you get it more than 3 feet into the center of a tree, you'll see dieback. There's just not enough light there. And so I'd say at least 6 to 8 hours. You have a better estimate, Tim or Danny?
No, that's exactly my thought as well. So on the trials you did, all of that work was done on Hass, correct?
Correct, yes.
And what time of year was the stumping done?
Okay, so the ideal pattern, you know, and nothing is ideal in avocados. Really, you want to have all your fruit off before springtime flowering. And you want to do all your pruning at least 3 months prior to August, September, because that's when you get differentiation between vegetative and floral buds. So you want to look at sometime in the spring when you do your pruning. So the ideal pattern would be you harvest all your fruit in February, March, boom, you prune, and then you let fruit set happen, and then that wood that comes off the cuts come to maturity in August, September, and they're ready to flower the following year. So that's the ideal pattern. So the closer you can follow to that pattern, the more successful your pruning is going to be.
All right, so last question. Are there ways to keep the regrowth strong enough to maintain the future fruit load so it lessens the snap off of the new branch?
Head it back. Okay, the water sprouts that you get, the shoots that come from those latent buds is going to shoot straight up, and it's not going to flower until it gets to a certain height. And what you want to do is encourage these lateral branches to push. So you're going to see a 3 to 5 to 6 foot, you know, water sprout come out. You want to head that back to about 2 feet to force the laterals. So that'll make a stronger connection.
Yeah. And then also the other thing I watch for is, where are they coming from on, you know, if you're doing, you know, a stumping, where are they originating from on that branch? If they're coming off the bottom side, they're going to be a weaker connection. When they load up with fruit, they're going to be more prone to snapping off. So select ones that are emerging from the side and the top of, you know, of the parent branch, and you'll have a stronger connection that's less prone to snapping off.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, we have hit 11 o'clock, so being mindful of everyone's time, we appreciate our 3 speakers today. Thank you very much. And we're going to go ahead and end the webinar. Thanks, everyone.